You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, Broadway, showbiz stories, news and gossip with Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, and Stephen J. Rubin. Today we talk all about Marilyn Monroe. And now, here's Julian, Arthur, and Steve.
You know, guys, sometimes I think about stars I would have liked to have met in real life. And there's such a kaleidoscope of people, but I would say in my top 5 people I would like to have met but never did would have been Marilyn Monroe. But Julian has never met her. I've never met her. Mike's never met her. But Arthur, you had the special experience when you were an intern. Not an intern, you were a page, right?
I was a page for Columbia Pictures in the late 1950s. I was a teenager going to City College at night, taking a business course. And to understand that situation is to know that I was on the 11th floor or the executive floor, and there was a receptionist who had been there from day one with Harry and Jack Cohn, a little wonderful old man named Al. And in those days, he was certainly in his mid-80s, but he's just a sweetheart of a guy. And everybody knew Al. And I was the executive page, so I would just roam the floor or sit by him. And when someone would come out of the elevators, I would escort them to the office of the executive they were visiting. Plus, there were screenings and stuff. I was running errands. It was an incredible job. But the elevators, there were 4 elevator doors that are still there on 711 Fifth Avenue. And every time the door opens, invariably somebody walked off the elevator, like William Holden or Joan Crawford or Jason Robards or Richard Conte. So it was always like, when the elevator door opened, what's coming up next, And one day the elevator doors opened and there was Marilyn Monroe, May of 1957. And she was unbelievable. She came off the elevator. It was like opening up a screen and seeing her on a movie screen. She looked that good. I can tell you, she was wearing like a soft, creamy kind of a colored dress. It was the summertime, so she had straps on her shoulders. She had mascara coming down her eye, from her eyebrow, whatever it was. And she wore shoes that were open-toed. And listen, ladies, if you're listening, they were open-toes. I remember it all. And when I walked her down, Miss Monroe, I'm here to see Abe Schneider, who at the time was the president of the company. And so I escorted her to Mr. Schneider's office. There were these big glass doors that are still there to this day, I'm sure. And I had to open them because they were very heavy. And as we were walking, you hear the click of a woman's foot in her shoe because there was no stockings. I think it was, matter of fact, I don't think she was wearing anything on it. She was jello. Man, she was unbelievable. This is just walking down the hall with her. And she smiled at me, and Miss Monroe, please follow me, and we walked down the hall. And that was the extent of my meeting with Marilyn Monroe, but I'm talking about it now all these years later. She was as magnificent in person as she was on the screen. Believe me, she had some kind of appeal that was beyond any actress that I've ever seen.
It was an interesting time, the 1950s. I mean, we kind of look back in history and we see these tough, strong women of the 40s, Betty Davis and Joan Crawford and Greta Garbo and Katharine Hepburn. And all these women are really strong and tough. And then into the 50s comes a totally kind of different, huge movie star, Marilyn Monroe. Sexy, vulnerable, available, funny, and seemingly just someone that is going to be a lot of fun to spend time with. It's an amazing thing how that whole switch from 40s to 50s took place. And and most of us, 3 out of 4 of us anyhow, grew up in the 50s. We know that there were all these copycats. Every studio had to have one. Harry Cohn had to have Kim Novak if he could, and J. Arthur Rank had Diana Dawes, and then Fox had, besides Marilyn, backing her up, Sherry North and Jane Mansfield. And then there was Joy Lansing and Barbara Nichols. None of them, not one of them, could compare to Marilyn Monroe.
Julian, wouldn't you think, though, that there is such a thing as the elite of the elites, and it's true in any field? There were a lot of scientists. There was Albert Einstein. There were a lot of baseball players. There was Willie Mays. A lot of golfers, Tiger Woods. And on it goes. There were a lot of actresses, and then there was Marilyn Monroe. Different than all of them, going back to Harlow or whoever was a so-called sex symbol, this woman had it. And so she was just the elite of the elites. Heard so many stories about her from the guys at the Friars Club in Los Angeles, the Milton Berles, the Red Buttons, the Tony Martins. She was all right. She was like a friend, to everybody. She was a nice person. Apart from this reputation and all, she was a down-to-earth, very nice, somewhat insecure person. They all had something to say about her, and she did play around a lot. It was part of her mojo, and there were a lot of guys who liked to play. So,
I think it's kind of true to say that she redefined sexuality or sexiness for a new generation, because you guys are better at this than me, but before Marilyn Monroe, who's sexy in Hollywood? I mean, certainly Rita Hayworth had her heyday where she would.
Well, you had Rita Hayworth. You had Ava Gardner. You had Lana Turner. I mean, there were women. I mean, there's not a lack, but there was something about Marilyn Monroe that was different from all of them. And one of them was the feeling of, I think, availability. That unlike these other women who were almost like goddesses that you could just worship, she was there to play, it seemed. She just seemed to be there. And it was her vulnerability, which was also very, very true. She had that. In the whole history of film that I've been trying to do some research myself, I was trying to think who could do sexiness and vulnerability? Who could do it? And I was thinking I could only come up with a few. Carole Lombard, perhaps. Goldie Hawn at one point. Goldie Hawn had that. But you can't compare those people to Marilyn Monroe. Just can't.
But there was this element. There was this thing happening that was this. It just came off the screen. Rita Hayworth was a huge sex figure in Gilda. Lana Turner, certainly in The Postman Always Rings Twice and many other movies. Esther Williams in her swimming movies. But along comes Marilyn Monroe, and if you look at a movie called Asphalt Jungle, which was, I think, about 1950,
right?
She's right in that world of when these other actresses were happening. In 2 minutes, she was, you could look at her on the screen and want to say, I think I'm getting excited. She just had that certain thing.
Her first moment is she's kind of sleeping in a large chair in what's his name's apartment on the beach. You remember his name, Arthur?
What was the movie?
The Asphalt Jungle. I'm talking about
Louis Calhern. Louis
Calhern has a beach house, and he's conveniently deposited Angela, played by Marilyn Monroe, in that house. And we first meet her in her chair, just waking up from a nap. And Julian hit the note perfectly. She had a vulnerability about her. I mean, she wasn't dressed sexily at times. She was basically, just in regular clothes, but she just projected a vulnerability. And, it's interesting. We mentioned Rita Hayworth, and we mentioned some of the other actresses. The World War II pinups, and I know that Rita was a big World War II pinup, as was Betty Grable, and there were so many others. And it's interesting that Marilyn Monroe basically started her career as a pinup. Her first assignments in Hollywood were as a model, and she got I think she was working at a radio plane factory in Van Nuys. And she was part of the Rosie the Riveter generation, women working in industry and helping the war effort. And somebody got a hold of her to make a photograph of her, and talk about a woman who just jumped out at that camera lens. And
we have an old friend of mine who passed away some years ago in his 90s. He had one of those calendars with a nude Marilyn Monroe, where she's on the side. We've all seen it, and he gifted that to me in his will. So I have that calendar somewhere in my closet. But I understand I can get $500 for it. Not that I would take it, but it's one of the originals of her. And she was just something that was different. But I must tell you that anybody I knew who met her amongst these people from the Friars Club or anywhere else always said she was as nice as could possibly be, as she appeared to me in the 3 minutes that I spent with her. She was just nice.
Well, she was a regular human being. And I think the problem is that she has been the source of so much mythologizing, or however you say that. She's such a part of Hollywood's fabric. She and James Dean, they're two icons that have, they died very young, and they continue to fascinate people. I did not like the movie that was recently made with Ana de Armas. I thought Ana de Armas, by the way, was fabulous. She did a perfect job. But the movie itself was so depressing, and I thought it portrayed her in such a dark light. And even though there may have been obviously aspects of her life that were very dark, it just seemed too much dark and not enough light. The only moment it popped for me was when she did her famous musical number from the one with
Gentlemen Before Blondes, Diamonds are a girl's best friend. Yeah,
exactly. That is a show-stopping number, and that's what I really enjoyed about that movie. That 4 or 5 minute segment.
How about we're having a heat wave in no business like show business?
Oh, yeah. I mean, she just palpitated with charisma and sexuality.
We want to just cut to the chase for a second. Every man wanted to sleep with Marilyn Monroe, and from what I understand, many of them did. She was happy to make love with you if she thought it would make you happy and feel good. If she liked you, she had to like you. This is what I hear. I'm hearing this from people like Milton Berle, Eddie Fisher, Tony Martin, Red Buttons, some lawyers who hung out. Marilyn was just a sweetheart, and she loved to play. And she loved to make you happy. So she did sleep with guys. She was flirtatious by just standing there. Well, she didn't have to flirt with anybody.
One of the myths that seem to perpetuate throughout people studying movie is that she was a dumb blonde. She was so far from a dumb blonde that you couldn't believe. Now, I was fortunate enough to spend time with a bunch of people over the years who knew her very well, starting with Elia Kazan, the director. It was through Elia Kazan that she met Arthur Miller. In fact, it was he had been having an affair with her, and he was going to take her to a very famous producer's party named Charlie Feldman, big producer, agent, and he couldn't that night. And he called Arthur Miller and asked him to pick her up, and he would join them later. And that's how she met. That's how Arthur met her. But she was. Eli Wallach told me that when we got to know her for the Actors Studio, she had come back to see him in Tea House of the August Moon, and he was having contract difficulties. And he told me she sat down with him, took out these little glasses, went over his contract, gave him points. He really, what he should do. She was quite intelligent. And certainly, people say, look what Madonna did with her career. Marilyn Monroe made her career. She's the one who made her career.
I would also say, yes, she made her career, but she was a product of the studio system at a time when the studio really paid attention to their actors and they created stars. I think that Zanuck at first, according to the story goes, Zanuck wasn't sure about her at all. I think he begrudgingly signed her to an early contract, and they didn't do anything with her, and she ended up being loaned out to other studios. But when a studio saw potential, which they later did, I think everybody started to contribute. Yes, Marilyn knew what she wanted, but she had hair and makeup specialists, she had costume specialists, she had voice coaches, she had dramatic coaches. I think that one of the disappointments about today's movie business is there is no system for making stars anymore. And what's the outcome of that? We don't really have movie stars anymore. And I think in the 50s, Hollywood was all about movie stars. And I think Marilyn came to the studio at the right time.
Well, yes, and there's early Marilyn, and then there's the later Marilyn. Part of the later Marilyn, without question, was that she got involved with a lot of sleeping pills, wake-up pills, nervous pills, anti-anxiety pills. She drank. Eddie Fisher confided to me that he could have slept with her 1,000,000 times. She was that easy, but she did like him. But she was always like in a drug thing when he was with her, and he couldn't do it. I read where Frank Sinatra never slept with her and could have, without question. But he just was a little, didn't feel right about it. They all liked her too, by the way. So that was part of it.
We do have a woman who had a horrible background, in and out of foster homes,
Childhood.
no father at all. Her mother in a mental institution. She was attacked, really abused by a man when she was a little girl. So she had a terrible beginning of her life. And
Julian, the movie that Steve referred to with Anna Armas, if that's her name, the beginning of that movie was a horror story. It might as well be Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. It was awful. I could hardly watch it. Yeah. But she apparently did live through that.
She did.
That's part of her life.
And she ended up really becoming the success that she wanted to be. But it was interesting. Her goal was not money or fame. Her goal was to be taken seriously, not to be laughed at, not to be.
Can you explain her relationship with Arthur Miller?
Yeah, I mean, she was going to be with a Nobel Prize winning author, the man who made Death of a Salesman and All My Sons, and he wanted her. I mean, this was a great thing to help her self-esteem. Arthur, you mentioned the calendar. The calendar could have killed her career. In those days, you can't do that. But she handled it so beautifully. They said to her, "What did you have on when you were posing?" And she said, "The radio." They asked her things like, "Why did you do it?" And she said, "I was hungry."
No.
She was smart. She knew what to get. She knew how to get the public behind her. Not to think that she was a slut or whatever, but someone who had a great sense of humor. Eli Wallach, I told you about the thing, but he was a good dancer, and she loved to dance, and they would go dancing together. She was a very multi-layered human being. I think there was a lot to say about that woman besides what we kind of felt we were getting from the studio. And Steve is right. I mean, in those days, the studios could make a person. They could really take that career and really move it up.
They made her. Yeah, absolutely.
And it wasn't always successful because sometimes the actors felt like indentured servants, and the studio said, "We want you to do this movie, and if you didn't want to make that movie, you would go on suspension." So they hurt you that way. And I think that Marilyn, what I liked about Marilyn also was she was always trying to improve her craft. She would go back to New York. She became very close with Lee Strasberg and his daughter Susan, and she really wanted to become better. I mean, she's very disparaging of things that she had done, which I think are terrific. It's not one of her better known films, but I absolutely love a Western she did with Robert Mitchum called River of No Return, which was directed by Otto Preminger. And it's interesting. I have a quote here. Marilyn, referring to River of No Return, she later called it her worst film, a Z-grade cowboy movie in which the acting finished second to the scenery and cinemascope, which I thought was interesting. I guess River of No Return was the first film to feature the color the cinemascope. The opening audio. You know, that famous fanfare music that Alfred Newman created for 20th Century Fox, and they created the extension. That was the first part of it.
What was the film with Cary Grant and the chimpanzee?
Monkey Business. Monkey Business.
And she was in that, right?
Yes, she was.
She's in Monkey. Now, that was one of her dumb blonde roles. I mean, she would take these roles, and it's interesting, 1952 film. She played a character named Lois Laurel, who's kind of the bombshell who works in this scientific office where Cary Grant is trying to invent a youth serum. And I always liked that movie, Arthur, because it was filmed in my neighborhood. I saw Pico Boulevard in 1951. It's just right there.
Well, great. One of the things that we should talk about, I don't know if you guys remember that she and, of all people, Ella Fitzgerald were very close friends. Very close friends. Ella Fitzgerald wanted to get out of these small jazz clubs that she was playing in. And Marilyn Monroe went to the owner of the Mocambo in Los Angeles and said, if you book Ella Fitzgerald in here, I will come every night, sit ringside and bring celebrities, but I want you to book her. And the guy did. And it was because of her. Ella Fitzgerald said the reason she went to her peak career was Marilyn Monroe. So these are kind of stories that you find as you do research or you talk to other people.
I think it's great that out of the 40s, there was a thing in the movie business where they would always give nicknames to some of their stars, like Jimmy the Schnoz Durante. And that was aptly called that because his nose was absolutely huge. But then they have Marie the Body McDonald, but she had a nice body. Then they gave one that a lot of people, Betty Grable's legs. Betty Grable had plain normal legs, but they figured if they bet it, it would work. Her legs were just legs. But they couldn't find a nickname for Marilyn Monroe because somebody said, you don't need one, just put her out there, that's all, and you don't need the nickname. But look, then she had her relationship with Joe DiMaggio. Now there was something made in publicity heaven. You have not only Joe DiMaggio, but he was again the elite of the elites. He had enormous charisma, as she did, and the trouble with that marriage was that he was a very, very jealous guy. There's a great book, if any of our listeners want to read it, called A Hero's Life, Joe DiMaggio, about, I think, David Ben Kramer. What a great book about the life of DiMaggio, and you get to understand what he was like and the mishigas that this guy had with all of his talent. So for him to wind up marrying her, again, he was an older guy, and she liked that. That was the father thing. But that was an amazing publicity marriage. They couldn't go anywhere without, Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe was huge. I don't know if I ever told a story, but in Toots Shores one night, an old guy came up to DiMaggio with his grandson and had a baseball and said, Mr. DiMaggio, would you mind signing? He was sitting in a booth with Marilyn Monroe and having their dinner. And DiMaggio said, yeah, sure, I'll be happy to do it. And the kid's about 9 years old. And DiMaggio signs the ball. And so the man says, thank you very much, Mr. DiMaggio. We appreciate it. And as they were walking away from the table with his grandson, you hear a voice, would you like my autograph too?
Yeah.
And it was Marilyn Monroe. And she signed the ball. And I believe the ball was owned by a guy named Barry Halper, who is the world's foremost collector of baseball memorabilia. But the kid didn't know from nothing.
You were the guy Arthur, who made me read that book, suggested it. And I remember that DiMaggio would only generally want to be paid to sign a ball. So
but not with that kid. You're right, though. Yeah. But the thing about that marriage was, if you read the book, you get to understand why. This was one of the most jealous people in the world, Joe DiMaggio, marrying Marilyn Monroe. You take it from there.
That's true. But how many people realize that this marriage was 9 months? That was it.
Yeah.
That was the entire length of their marriage.
And then they shot the movie 7 Year Itch. Her dress blew up and he had it. I can't take this no
more. Let's talk a little bit about that, because Billy Wilder's directing the 7 Year Itch, which of course was based on a big play that Tom Ewell starred in. And that sequence was shot. They shot the whole movie in L.A. on the studio lot, except for the sequence where Billy Wilder wanted to get on the streets of New York City and shoot that subway grating. 2,000 people showed up that night. So not only did Joe DiMaggio get embarrassed because he saw it, but there were 2,000 people there behind him who also saw it. So apparently, as the story goes, she got home after the shoot that night and he beat her up. I mean, I don't exactly know what he did to her. I don't know whether he slugged her or slapped her, but they got divorced 9 months later or a few months later. And but that sequence of, I'm not quite sure where it is. There is a giant statue of that dress blowing up. I'm not sure if it's in Las Vegas or somewhere. But,
Steve, I think they ultimately shot it in Hollywood, though. I don't think
they did. Well, what happened was Wilder said that the sound was so bad on the streets, although that doesn't mean they couldn't have redubbed it. But yes, they came back and shot that same sequence on the street and on the studio lot. So that sequence we're seeing in the movie, it doesn't even take place in New York, or it wasn't even shot in New York. But Marilyn caused all sorts of
Steve,
attention.
It was, though. It was shot in New York initially.
Yes, no, that's what I said. It was shot in, but Billy didn't like the sound. So he came back and they reshot it on the Fox lot.
The DiMaggio whole incident, the short marriage, they did, after Arthur Miller and she split, they did get together as friends again. And as you guys know, maybe the listeners do not, for many, many years after, Joe DiMaggio, 3 times a week, sent roses to her gravesite.
Have you been there? I've been there. See, I bet you Steve's been there. Julian's right behind the AFCO Theater on Wilshire Boulevard.
In Westwood. Oh, yeah. I've been there many times. She's in a vault. She's not in the ground. She's in a vault. And that is her final resting place. I mean, she lived not far from me in Brentwood. She lived on one of the Helena Drives right off of San Vicente. And there's a great deal of mystery about her death. I mean, the basic reason is she died from an overdose of barbiturates. But there are various, of course, like anything, there are various conspiracy theories because she was involved with both of the Kennedy brothers.
And Peter Lawford.
And Peter Lawford, who introduced
the busboy down the road. But that was who she was. I'm telling you, the reputation was what the reputation was. Marilyn liked to have fun, liked to make you feel happy. That was her way of saying, I need love. And that she would sleep with you if she liked you. Wish I could have been there, but you know.
Getting back to the 7-year itch for a second, the dress she wore in the subgrade grading blow up sequence sold for $5.5 million. $5.5 million. And I guess recently Kim Kardashian borrowed that dress. And it was apparently she wore that for one night.
I'd like to know the person who bought that dress for $5.5 million. Could it have been Eli Musk? Who knows? What was her breakthrough movie, Steve? What made her a superstar?
Well, I think that she started to do those musicals, like we were talking earlier about. How to Marry
Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and How to Marry a Millionaire.
Gentlemen and Marry a Millionaire. Gentlemen Prefer those really catapult her because she got on the radar with The Asphalt Jungle and she got on the radar with All About Eve in 1950. Both of those were little minor.
She was great in that,
parts. Both great, and then she got the contract at Fox. This is the second time around, and she started to make.
But we have to mention Niagara. Because Niagara was the really first big one, I think. I remember the ad. They had her lying on the top of the falls. They had superimposed her on top of Niagara Falls, and that was quite something. But Steve had mentioned her years at Fox, but we also have to mention that she stood up to the studio and said, "I'm not doing these films anymore. I don't want to do this kind of stuff. I'm out of here. I'm going to New York. Oh, we're going to sue you. You can't do it." And she said, you're done. Now, she was probably the highest grossing person they had. According to the web, if we can believe it, $200 million were the amount of movies, how much they were making with her over her career. They claim that's $2 billion today. That's what it would be.
Today, exactly. I think that one of her issues was they were still paying her the same salary they paid her in 1950 when she did walk-ons.
That's exactly right.
So,
so what she did was she said, "I'm out," and she got more creative control and much more money, and she went back. And that's how it. Now, very few people would have the nerve or guts to do something like that, but she did it. Betty Davis is the only other one that I know that stood up to Jack Warner. Very few actors or actresses would dare take on a studio, and she did it.
Yeah.
And she actually started her own production company, which never gets talked about. Marilyn Monroe Productions.
MM.
And I think one of the few films she did on her own was the one that didn't do very well, where she starred opposite Laurence Olivier in The Prince and the Showgirl. Yeah. That didn't work quite well. But to answer your question, Arthur, I think the movie that really just catapulted her to the next level was The 7-Year Itch. I think that really was a huge hit.
That was before Gentlemen Before Blondes?
No, I think Gentlemen Before Blondes was before that. I think The 7-Year Itch really cemented her as a major
Very
actor.
Interesting thing about Marilyn Monroe's career is that it's crazy, but there's an analogy to a great singer named Tony Bennett. Tony Bennett had a hit record in the late 1940s. I think it was Because of You. He made these other hits, Rags to Riches, and they were always hits, but they were never huge hits. They were hits. 1962, 14 years after he starts, he makes a breakthrough record called I Left My Heart in San Francisco. And now he's Tony Bennett in a whole different caliber. So after all those years being successful, boom, here comes this thing. Marilyn Monroe does all these movies between the late 40s and the 50s, and along comes Some Like It Hot. That was 1959. So by then she's a star. She's certainly big. I mean, she's Marilyn Monroe. But here comes the best thing she ever did in 1959, only 3 years away from when she passed away, So
Sugar Cane, one of her
was
great
she ever
characters.
Better? Was she ever better?
Oh, I think she's wonderful in that. You're introduced to her next to the train as Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis in drag are kind of hobbling down the side of the train in their high heels. And all of a sudden, out of the blue comes Marilyn in front of her in her high heels. And that Tookus is just on springs. And the way Jack Lemmon looks at her rear, it's one of the classic sight gags of all time. I mean, he's amazed at her. And there's just something, there's something about the way Marilyn, not only the way she looked, but the way she used her physicality, just the way she just draped herself in any situation. She knew what she had.
She had the whole 9 yards. She was the...
She had the whole 9 yards, exactly. And the camera loved her. And I think one of the problems that began to develop, yes, she was headstrong, but she also started to be a little lackadaisical with her showing up late to the set, which drove a lot of.
But a lot of that was the pills. She got wedded to these pills.
Right. She suffered from anxiety, and she was very shy, apparently. And I'm reminded of the movie that was released 10 years later, Valley of the Dolls, because in a way, Marilyn Monroe could have been one of those girls in Valley of the Dolls, worshiping the pills to get her out of bed or get her into bed to get to sleep.
MGM did that with Judy Garland, too. Uppers, downers, relaxing as a kid, late teens and stuff.
One of the films that she did dramatic, it was not a comic role, was Bus Stop. Bus Stop was not only a very well-made movie by Josh Logan, it starred Marilyn, and the co-star was an unknown movie actor named Don Murray. He had made a name for himself on the New York stage, but he was now in his first movie. She was very kind to him, and he told me a few stories. The most interesting one was one that Renee Taylor told on our show a few weeks ago, which was that Marilyn, when she got nervous, would break out into rashes. And he had a scene with her in bed where she was nude, and when he went in to do the scene, she had come in beautiful and gorgeous, and now she was just filled with all these rashes all over. She obviously was highly nervous, very, very high-strung, and nervous about acting, even though she could do it. But I guess she didn't have that feeling.
You know, they said that when she arrived at that JFK birthday party where she sang him happy birthday, I think he was already president by then, that the dress was designed, and I may have confused, by the way, the dress. I'm not sure if the dress for the auction was from 7 Year Itch or it was the Happy Birthday, Mr. President dress. But apparently when she walked out, everybody thought she was nude because it was like a type of dress which was very, very almost like it looked like skin on her.
That was the point of the dress.
That was the point of the dress, exactly.
That was 2 points of the dress.
And Jackie Kennedy would not go to that affair. She knew what was going on, and she knew a lot of what was going on. But that clearly was, they did have an affair, and she did have an affair with Bobby Kennedy after that. Wow, what can you say? How do you think that was portrayed in that movie, Steve and Julian, in the Anna Armas movie, the JFK thing?
I thought it was just terrible. The way she goes into JFK's hotel room and services him was so degrading.
How about the way the Secret Service treated her, though? They dragged her down the hall. My God.
Oh, I mean, it was degrading to her, but it was also degrading to the audience. I found myself needing to take a shower after watching that sequence. There's something, there's certainly the poetic license of filmmakers to do what they want in biopics. But I'll tell you, this also applied to the Judy Garland biopic from a couple of years ago, which depicted her last days in London, etc., where they forgot what made Judy Garland a star, and they just showed the dark side of her. And I don't think that's right. I think, yes, it's a realistic biography, but if you're going to do a biography film on Judy Garland, let's see Judy Garland, what made her a star, even if you do it in flashbacks. And there was very little of that in that biography.
Marilyn had great aspirations. Susan Strasberg told me that she wanted to do Anna Christie. She was studying to play Anna Christie. She wanted to do Rain, the Somerset Maugham piece that also was called, what Joan Crawford did, but then it was remade with the second time around, and with Rita Hayworth as Miss Sadie Thompson. But she also wanted to do, besides Rain and Anna Christie, Truman Capote wanted her for Holly Golightly. And it was Paula Strasberg, who was her acting coach, Lee's wife, who put the kibosh on it and said, don't do it. Do not do it.
Really? I heard it was because the studio was afraid of the fact that she wasn't showing up on time and could rise production costs. But you're saying Paula did it?
Well, I think it's real simple because there wasn't a movie that she made that she was on time. There wasn't a film.
Yeah, but again, that had more to do not with her attitude as much as it did with the kind of medicine and stuff she was on. It screwed her up a lot. It's a funny thing in those days when I was working at Columbia Pictures, Kim Novak would come up a lot to that executive floor, and she would, be with the casting director, or whatever. She had friends there, and she was terrific. I mean, Kim Novak was beautiful and very broad-shouldered, and she was a movie star. But the moment that Marilyn Monroe walked off that elevator, in 3 seconds, she was better than Kim Novak. It's the old, Giants or Dodgers, Yankees or Red Sox. Marilyn Monroe was...
Kim kind of had a quiet, smoldering
quality. Very nice person, by the way.
Very nice person. But there's nothing quiet about Marilyn Monroe's sexuality. I mean, I'll go back to River of No Return. I mean, she's basically playing a bar floozy, and yet she has these charming moments with that young actor Tommy Rettig, who plays Robert Mitchum's son. And she's playing her guitar, and Marilyn studied very carefully to do the guitar chords. And unlike a lot of movies where they bring in a singer to do the voice, that's Marilyn Monroe's voice. And she has a charm about it.
We have to also think that maybe she would have sang Moon River.
Well, it's funny. I could have easily seen her in that role. It would have been a great role for her. I mean, Audrey Hepburn was obviously legendary in that role, but that also could have been a Marilyn Monroe role.
What was the scene in Niagara where she comes down the motel steps and she's in this tight dress and
a tight red dress, and the people are having a little cocktail party out by the phonograph, and she walks out like Aphrodite arriving from the cosmos, and it's a stunning. I mean, Jean Peters played one of the actresses there, and they're all kind of, their mouths are open as she walks out, and Marilyn being Marilyn, I mean, she cut a swath through those people, and
she was very well read. She reading mattered a great deal to her. And she wanted to play Grushenka in The Brothers Karamazov. And they at Fox, they just laughed at her, said, forget it. And she had a great line. She said, no, it's 19th century Fox, not 20th century.
I'm reminded of that reference that often is reported on Cary Grant, that somebody was saying how wonderful it would be to be Cary Grant. And Cary Grant's responded, I would love to be Cary Grant. I think with Marilyn, since she was so manufactured by so many entities, to create the Marilyn Monroe, she probably would have liked to have been just a normal person, not Marilyn Monroe. I mean, she probably would have liked to take some time off. There's so much pressure on her from so many quadrants. You wonder that she survived as long as she did.
She wanted to be a mother. She wanted to have a baby. She had all kinds of, yeah. But Susan Strasberg tells this story that they're in New York City, and Marilyn Monroe, knew how to walk down Fifth Avenue and not be noticed. She knew how to put the hat on. She knew how to wear the coat a certain way. And Strasberg, the first time she walked with her, said, wow, Marilyn, no one's recognizing you. She said, watch this. She took off her hat. That's all she had to do. And they went crazy. She said she knew how to bring her back whenever she wanted to, which was kind of funny.
The true magic of her physicality, other than the obvious, was that most girl movie stars were thin, and whatever they were, they had big boobs, but they were basically thin. Marilyn Monroe was Zoftic. She had a body. I mean, and so therefore, when she wore tight things, it jiggled. Everything jiggled. The tush jiggled, everything, and it was sexy. And that was part of it. So just her walking was fantastic, as you point out in Some Like It Hot when she's walking down the train station.
Yeah, I think that wasn't it true that a lot of actresses, or maybe a lot of women in the 40s, had to wear a girdle because it was considered, not proper for a woman to walk down the street and let things bounce. And she, I think even in one interview, she told somebody that she didn't believe in wearing underwear. It's like waving a red flag.
Like she needed that, right? Like you really needed that on top of everything else. The day that I met her, she was not wearing underwear. I would swear to that she was not wearing underwear.
But that was the whole idea. I mean, that's
exactly
the whole idea of self-promotion. This woman knew exactly what to do. She knew, without the Fox studio, she knew how to do it. There's a great photographer woman, I forgot her name, but she tells the story that whether she was posing for her, meaning the photographer, or some kid who just wanted to do a picture, she knew how to pose for a picture. And as Arthur said, the camera loved her. The camera just loved her.
The thing also, and I pointed out earlier about her playing guitar with Tommy Rettig and River of No Return, she was very comfortable as a musical person in film. I mean, a lot of actors have to really work it. She seemed very comfortable in those musical numbers. The one you described, Julian, from How to Marry a Millionaire, that number. She's terrific in that, and she's in a number of films where she's doing musical stuff and so charismatic in so many ways.
There's no business like show business. A very entertaining movie. Not a great movie, but entertaining. She's paired off with Donald O'Connor, which kind of didn't make sense.
It didn't make any sense.
But
it did to Donald.
How about that? Yeah, right. How about Donald O'Connor as a talent? What a talent he was.
Yes.
But when she does, we're having a heat wave. Irving Berlin, of course. It's worth listeners and all of us to take another look at that scene, which is 100% Marilyn Monroe singing, dancing, and moving and everything. And that's one of the classic scenes that she ever did. Great song, of course, but I think she did her own singing, as a matter of fact, in that.
And which I'm not surprised. The movie her last movie, which of course has gotten a reputation of its own of mythic proportions, of course, is The Misfits for John Huston, with Clark Gable, Eli Wallach, Montgomery Clift, Thelma Ritter. It's an odd movie, and I don't think it was successful when it came out.
What was wrong with that movie, guys?
Screenplay. It was not
written by who? Who wrote that?
Arthur Miller. Arthur Miller wrote it for her. But that was the end of their marriage, not only because of the movie, but they were fighting in front of everyone on the movie. They were. It was not a thing, but something's got to give. The one that never got finished, the last film that she never finished with Dean Martin, has wonderful footage on the computer, on the internet. She was quite something in that. And when she left, when they fired her, they said, "Well, we're bringing in," I think it was Lee Remick. I'm not sure whom, but Dean Martin said, "No, I'm not doing it unless you hire her again." And they did hire her again, and then sadly she died.
So the guys she got involved with that we know of before she was Norma Jean and all that. Who was the first? Was it Miller or DiMaggio?
DiMaggio.
DiMaggio into Arthur Miller. Listen to this, though. From Joe DiMaggio to Arthur Miller, who was a huge figure in plays and what have you, Death of a Salesman. She goes from there into President Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy. She's always in the news with these people that she gets involved with, which only added to her luster and for them as well. But she was always right in the middle of whatever was happening in American pop culture.
What was so amazing to me is, the Daily News and the Daily Mirror were really newspapers in New York City, mostly or often for immigrants, because there was a lot of pictures and they would learn English the best they could. The headline and I always thought, wow, what were these immigrants thinking when the headline of both those papers said, J.D. leaves M.M.? I mean, that were the headlines. I mean, and everybody knew who were certainly in America certainly knew what they were writing about.
Yeah. Well,
how does Donald O'Connor go from Marilyn Monroe to Francis the Talking Mule?
For money.
They both had beautiful rear ends.
How many Francis the Mules were there? Were there a couple of movies?
Oh, yeah.
2 or 3?
There were about 5 or 6, and I think the last one, Mickey Rooney replaced Donald O'Connor and did one of them.
Let's put it this way about Marilyn Monroe. There will never be another Marilyn Monroe. There never was, and there never will be. She is one of those people that you just can't replace.
There is somebody I should mention that kind of reminds me of the charisma that Marilyn generated, certainly on more of a B level, was Betty Page. If you look back at a lot of the pinups, a lot of the B magazines, pictorials, Betty Page has also developed kind of a mythos about her. But you're right, Marilyn was so iconic. By the way, and I think you both know this, that when Hugh Hefner created Playboy magazine, the very first cover was Marilyn Monroe,
and the calendar, and the calendar was within. Yeah,
and the calendar.
Let's just say this quickly. She wasn't dumb, she wasn't fragile, and she could act.
And she was not only very sexy, obviously, but she loved sex. And that's great. Good for her. She played. That was what she did. And I've always said, Eddie Fisher once said to me, she would have liked you because you would have made her laugh. Oh, God, I'm so sorry to hear that. I would have been easy. Are you kidding? And by the way, any guy that she did like had to be very easy for her to say, let's have some fun. Okay, I think that'll be a good idea.
What's your favorite film of hers?
Something Like
Arthur?
It Hot. Yeah, she was fantastic.
The scenes that in terms of the sexy scenes that she played in all of her movies, I think the pinnacle was when she's on that yacht with Tony Curtis. That dress seems to be about to fall off. I mean, she's in that dress and out of it at the same time, all over Tony Curtis. If you ever wanted to be an actor in a scene, that probably would have been
that
it.
Scene, that scene is
goodness.
Classic. It's one of the great scenes of all time. Just think of the concept of it. There's nothing happening. I did it with a Cary Grant accent, and I can't seem to find my way through it. And she kids, well, let me try this. Not quite, and then the leg goes up. Billy Wilder. I mean, that had a lot to do with him too. But what a scene that was. She kept kissing him.
I think The 7-Year Itch, while not a great movie by any means, made all of us feel, if Tom Ewell can get it, I mean, maybe we got a shot. But the idea of Tony Curtis, we can't compete with Tony Curtis.
Well, it was the average guys. It was the average guy or any guy's wet dream. It was the wet dream scene.
You know who Billy wanted for the Tom Ewell
part?
Matthau. Walter Matthau, but the studio wouldn't go for it because he was an unknown at that time.
And Tom Ewell had done the play.
And he was so good. Billy loves narration, and just the narration at the beginning of that movie is so great to set it all up. And I often think about if you were going to remake the 7-Year Itch today, there are a number of actors who could have played the Tom Ewell role, but who plays Marilyn Monroe today? I mean, it's an interesting question.
And there was dead silence because we all knew there's no one that could play Marilyn Monroe.
No.
Julian, do you have a favorite movie of hers?
I was so fascinated by her in Bus Stop. I didn't love any of her movies. I just loved her. But Bus Stop, I couldn't believe that she could do the acting she did. I thought she was terrific in that.
Julian Schlossberg for $10 million.
Uh-oh.
What was the theme song from the movie The Bus Stop, and who wrote it? Who sang it?
I have just lost, once again, $10 million.
It was a great song. They played it throughout the film. It was done by the Four Lads.
And I know it wasn't. Lyrics, it can't be Standing on the Corner.
No. It was if you don't da 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 dum ba dum bum 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 ba da bum da 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 whatever it was called. The Four Lads hit, and it was a hit.
Well, it sounds like it was called da 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 dum.
I don't know the lyrics, but if you look it up, you'll find out what the name of the song is. But it was great. It blended with the movie perfectly.
Only in the 1950s can you have a musical group called the Four Lads.
And the Four Aces, and they were all fours.
Yeah.
Oh, the Letterman, the Four Lads. Oh, yes, absolutely.
And was it the 5 coins? Was it the 5 coins?
Well, I'm going to go on the record and tell you that my favorite, as I've mentioned already 4 times today, is River of No Return. It's not the greatest Western ever made. It's not even close. But the charisma between Marilyn and Robert Mitchum's character as they're running these rapids is just so much fun. It's funny because nobody liked Otto Preminger, and it was an odd choice to direct a Western because Otto wasn't known for directing Westerns. He did film noirs and comedies, and but he directed it and does a very, very good job.
Well, what they loved about Otto was, as the producer, he always came in on budget or under, and Fox used him a lot at his early part of his career, and then he formed his own company too.
Right.
Let's not leave out though this little thing she did, like you stated earlier, in Asphalt Jungle. She was in that movie for what, 3-4 minutes maybe, but wow.
Listen, she's even in All About Eve, when George Sanders tells us that she went to the Copacabana School of Acting.
She has one interesting moment in Asphalt Jungle where the detectives have arrived to arrest Emmerich, the Louis Calhern character, and they knock on her door. And they knock and knock, and finally she answers it and looks at him very sternly and says, "What do you want, you big banana head?"
Yes, actually, they could have called that "Don't bother to knock."
Just curious, guys. If you had to make a top 10 list of your favorite movies of all time, would All About Eve be in there?
Not for me.
It would be for
not
me.
even close.
In my top 10. That's how great that was.
Really?
Yeah. Julian?
It would probably be certainly in the top group that I made. I may have trouble with just 10, but
what a great movie.
All About Eve has one of the greatest screenplays ever written because Joe Mankiewicz knew how to write.
Oh, he won the Oscar that year for writing. He won the Oscar that year for directing, and I believe that won the Best Picture that year for and beat out Billy Wilder's entry, which was Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah, Steve, I'm just curious, Steve, if you had a top 10, what would be a movie that's in there that we would not really say, wow, it's just subjective to you? What would it be?
Wow, that's a tough question because most of the movies in my top 10 would be fairly familiar movies. That's a hard one, although I would say, and I don't generally list foreign films as in my top ones because I'm a terrible American snob when it comes to movies. But Paul Verhoeven did a film in the late 70s called Soldier of Orange, which introduced us to Rutger Hauer and Haroun Krabbe. And that would be probably in my top 20. And a lot of people probably never heard of it.
Did you see the list that I sent you guys of Roger Ebert's top 10?
Yes.
I did see that.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, I mean, Citizen Kane always pops up on top 10s. And I have to say, I finally watched it all the way through just 2 years ago. I'd always seen bits and pieces of it. And I think Citizen Kane in its day was revolutionary. But as an entertainment, after about halfway through, I started to flag.
I disagree
and I'm
with
probably
Steve. To me, it's one of the...
And you're absolutely probably right to disagree with me.
One of the greatest films ever made. That's an interesting list. People have subjective taste. So a lot of times you'll hear these movies, you say top 10, it's subjective. In my case, it would be Day of the Jackal. That movie stands up with me to anything.
I think that there's a great foreign movie when Steve brought up foreign film called Les Enfants du Paradis, The Children of Paradise. Is one of the most extraordinary movies ever made. And that would be certainly in my top 10.
Who mentioned Gates of Heaven? Somebody mentioned Gates of Heaven being... I'm not talking about the...
I think that was Roger Ebert. Wasn't that on his list?
Gates of Heaven. What?
Well, he also had...
It's subjective.
It's a very...
I was glad he said Notorious because I love Notorious.
Hey, listen, guys, one of my favorite films of all time is The Three Stooges Meet Hercules.
And I respect that choice. I do. So if we had to choose Marilyn Monroe's top 5 movies of all time, they would be, apart from Some Like It Hot.
Well, I would put my choice, River of No Return. Niagara would be there, 7 Year Itch, and one of those 2 musicals we mentioned. But we're coming to the end of our show, and we have to just do what we always do, is to thank our wonderful audience for listening in. And we would like you to subscribe. It's free. As you know, we're available on all the proper podcasts, Apple, Amazon, Spotify, wherever you get your favorite podcasts. We're also available on Facebook and Instagram. And if you'd like to write to us, you can write to us. We love hearing from you. We have an email address, talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. And we'd like to thank our producer today, Mike Faber, who doesn't get enough attention. Mike, you are the greatest.
And also want to say, as we end, that we really all loved Marilyn Monroe. Loved her. She was great. And a movie star like no other movie star. And it's been nice talking about her. See you guys.
Yeah, I think exactly the same. I think she was great.
Attention, people of Earth! Looking for a way to kill half an hour every week?
Try the Flopcast. It's a silly podcast about cartoons, music, comics, movies, obscure pop culture from the 70s and 80s, and chickens.
Join us! Bring coffee!
We're on the ESO network.
And we're at flopcast.net.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.